So good morning and thank you for joining us today. Myself, I'm Stan van Hof. I'm a business development manager at Exclusive Networks. I'm now located in Antwerp, but my colleague, our pre-sales engineer for Axonius, is Cedric, who's currently based in Las Vegas. For him, it's now around like 2 o'clock, I think, Cedric, at night.
Yeah.
Yeah. So at one moment, we're gonna mix do the share screen switch, but it's a webinar, so it's possible to do from a different part of the world. So, okay, thank you for joining us. It's our episode 2 of our webinar series, and we have a webinar series of 6 different episodes of 30 minutes where we're actually going to highlight some specific use cases or unique features of Axonius. And today we're going to talk about agent coverage. So our catchphrase for this session was stop buying new security tools. And instead, make sure that the tools that you bought are well adopted and give you near 100% coverage. Right, 100% might be different or difficult or challenging for some companies, but we're going to try to get at least near that 100% coverage. And why that agent coverage? Well, actually, Axonius did their research, and with their new customers, they noticed that almost 20% of all their assets is not covered, and that's actually a big issue. If 20% of your assets are not covered, then at a certain point you're going to get breached, and the impact could be enormous because you have no visibility on a large percent of all those assets. So that can be really a big challenge for a lot of companies. And because there's no EDR installed maybe, or a single sign-on, vulnerabilities are not being checked. So big challenge with a big possible bad outcome. So a good solution must solve complicated problems, right? So let's quickly talk about those problems that every company has. And the bigger the company, the harder that challenge often is, but this is also a challenge for mid-sized companies also. Because if you ask what's out there, meaning, okay, your organization, what's the story? What are your clients, your servers, your cloud applications or cloud data, wherever, it actually depends on who you're asking. Because if you ask the security team or the infrastructure team, modern workplace, developers, depending who you ask, you're going to get a different number, and nobody's actually seeing the entire picture. And even if you know it, even if every department had the right number, and you put them together, even if you had that overview, how are you going to do a follow-up? Because it was a snapshot of a certain time that you were certain you had that type of coverage or that type of installation, but now we're a few weeks later, and maybe today you had a good view, but next week you have no idea what's out there anymore, because we are in an ever-changing environment. And it's ever changing. So how is your deployment status? Because once you roll out a tool and you're near that 100%, maybe next week there are new clients, new servers, new cloud workloads spin up in the public cloud or whatever data center. You need to have an up-to-date inventory, because we know that 100% security is never possible, but 100% or near 100% coverage actually is. Okay. On the left, you see all different type of certifications. And what does that actually tells us? Well, depends who you're asking. For some organizations or people, it's just a check in the box because they needed to be compliant, and so they did. On the other hand, some companies really use this framework as a part of their cybersecurity strategy. But either ways, compliance just doesn't tell everything. It tells you we're compliant at some point, and it's based on actually a report of an auditor, right? So it's based on the questions that auditor asks the organization or some people within the organization. They do some sample tests, but it's still based on information that your company provides that auditor. And as we've established before, depending on who you're asking, that information is different and not complete. So yeah, and even if it was correct, again, a few weeks later, are you still compliant at that time? And I think that's with every framework, that identifying what you have is key. All right. In every framework, asset management is fundamental pillar to start from. And like a framework or like a CRM or whatever system you have, if you put shit in, you get shit out. And I think that's an issue, because if it's not based on relevant and accurate data, you have no idea how well you're actually protected, and then it's just checking the box for some organizations. And it's not only the small organizations. There are quite a big few organizations that have been in the news a couple of months, and they were compliant. All right, both LastPass as Uber, they were compliant with ISO 27001, SOC 2, SOC 2 Type 2. So these are very high standards of certifications. Yet they were both hacked with enormous impact. Okay. Again, every company can be hacked, right? There's never one company that can be 100% secure, and if your attacker has time, money, and resources, whatever, he will be able to hack you. The question is, how big is that impact once he is able to hack you and to breach you? And the impact with LastPass and Uber was, yeah, gigantic, because they were not compliant at all. They had their check in the box, but they had a lot of policies that were not implemented. Because if you just use it as a piece of paper instead of a strategy, you will have no visibility whatsoever. Are your policies well implemented? And they were neglected, right? Because if you had the policies and controls to verify that everything was working like it should be, they would never had so big of an impact with that breach. Because with LastPass, for example, they allowed access from an engineer's laptop to the cloud environment, the DevOps environment, from an unpatched device. And I mean unpatched with a Plex vulnerabilities, so Plex software, which was a few years old, that should have been patched a long time ago. So yeah, controls were not verified, because otherwise, how is that engineer still running that piece of software that's been outdated for years? You have the tools out there, they need to be deployed. So you need an overview of where deployment is, and what are you going to do if it's not well deployed? What is the impact? Are you going to enforce some type of violation? And it all comes down to this, right? Because we summarize our challenges and we see what the consequences can be. So you need to ask yourself following essential questions. And the answer is like, okay, we have all those assets, right? We know a lot of assets. We have a lot of assets we don't know. And not all assets are managed, but you have to need that view. Where are your assets? What is the assets? And what's the use of the assets? Is still necessary? Who is in charge of it? Who's responsible for it, for that asset? And if you have that asset, is it configured correctly? Not only the asset, but also the software tools that are deployed on it. And are you, as an organization, able to detect meaningful changes, right? Because if you switch from supplier, for example, will you be able to notice that in one single pane of glass, that, okay, we have new laptops from a new supplier, we have to do a whole lot of new checks because there's something that actually changed a lot in our organization. Are you able to detect those changes quickly and adapt and to it? So, and make sure it's not just some policies you have on paper, but really, does it adhere to my policies? The answer on those questions are often very painful for customers, because they really don't have a good visibility. And that's why we have Axonius. So we talked about the challenge that we have. Now let's talk about our approach to solve that challenge. By connecting to all of the security and management solutions we have already in our organizations, we will learn a lot about our assets, because we don't need another collector. We have all that data, because you have your AD, you have your EDR tool, you have your public cloud, you have your Okta, or whatever identity or user device or network device you have. You have all that information, so it's all been collected. Now we need it at one central point and aggregate that information. And that's exactly what Axonius does, right? He will connect to API integrations, more than 500 integrations they have. He will connect to all those different types of devices, collect the data that they already have, and then aggregate it. So Axonius is able to provide you three things. They will be able to provide a credible, comprehensive, and always up-to-date data asset inventory of all your devices, users, cloud assets, and even SaaS applications. And key word in that is always up-to-date, right? Because if you have an Excel sheet now, next week it's obsolete already. Second, it can also show the customers really those coverage gaps. So is going to talk about more about that. Okay, and the agent coverage, for example, it's a real security gap, because if you're not deploying your EDR tool at some assets, that's a real security issue. And okay, once we identified our issues, we're gonna automatically validate policies and enforce policies, right? That's the third option that Axonius can provide. All right, now it's time to see what Axonius actually can do. So I'm gonna stop sharing my screen, and Cedric will do it now. All right, Cedric, the floor is all yours.
Great, thanks Dan for this introduction. I would like to continue what you mentioned previously, the challenges and why asset management is actually so difficult. So if we take a look at a high level example here with a corporate device, usually it will be connected through some way a directory service. It could be a directory service located on premise, but also in the cloud, or even both. And maybe you are using multiple directory services. But what is even more important is, of course, your device needs access to the internet. And depending on where you are, for instance, if you are at the office, your traffic will pass through some network and security devices. But what do you do when you are on travel or you are working from home? Well, then you will establish a VPN connection. And this will also require some additional tools, such as a VPN agent. We also noticed that organizations try to not only secure the network, but also focused on securing the corporate devices itself, the endpoint. So organizations start looking at some different solutions, such as antivirus, later on EPP, and today even EDR, endpoint detection and response solutions. Today, we also have a lot of other security tools, and some of them that are kind of hot today are related to identity security. So we have identity access management solutions and privileged access management solutions to actually being able to verify and control the identity as well as the permissions that are being given to a user. So why is it actually so difficult for an organization to have an asset management in place? Well, if you take a look at this simple question that has been asked by a CISO, how many Windows hosts do I have inside my organization? Well, depending on the IT department you have, the different security tools you have, you will need to actually connect to all of those security tools to be able to give an answer to this question. So let's take a look at how that looks like. So again, we have all those security tools. Most of the time that will be single point solutions. And we also often say that those solutions are siloed. So all those solutions are not integrated well with each other, and they all contain their own data. So it's actually quite difficult to integrate all those data together. So instead of having to connect to all of those single point solutions and start looking for the data inside those solutions, you can start using Axonius to actually connect to your existing solutions using what is called an adapter. An adapter is basically an API connection to your existing solutions. And what is important to mention here, as Dan mentioned also previously, not only your security tools, but also business and management tools can be integrated with Axonius. Axonius will take all this data together. It will deduplicate, normalize, and correlate all the data together to actually give you that asset inventory in one single pane of glass. So Stan mentioned what are some benefits of Axonius. The real key point that I want to give you here is that Axonius can, as we mentioned, build this accurate asset inventory list, and based on that asset inventory, you can start looking, okay, what is going on in my environment? Are all the security solutions well deployed? Are they working correctly, configured correctly? And you can also use that asset inventory to discover rogue, ephemeral, or unmanaged devices. And also, as we talked about during the last webinar, it is kind of important to have the ability to identify devices that are not compliant or falling out of the compliancy. So let's take a look at that. We talked about adapters. So the adapters is the API connection that gives you the ability to actually get the data from your existing solutions. Axonius has a lot of predefined adapters available. An example here is the Microsoft Active Directory. But you can also, if Axonius does not provide you the built-in adapter. So we can see here a list of some solutions that are provided by Axonius, but you could also use the CSV and JSON if your solution is not listed out there. And of course, if you are using a security tool or business tool that is widely used but not actually in Axonius at this moment, you can also send a mail to Axonius to actually ask them to create one of those adapters, and they will do that with pleasure. Sorry. So now that we have understand that adapters can actually, adapters are being used to get the data from our existing solutions, let's take a look at what we can, how we can use that information. So if we take a look at the Axonius dashboard, we can see on the left-hand side the device discovery. So in this demo tenant, we have about 11 different adapters that are collecting some information about devices. More important is that each of these adapters, each of these solutions are actually identifying a different number of devices. So this is the true power of Axonius. Axonius will use all this data, again, normalize, deduplicate, correlate, and aggregate all data together to finally give you the total unique devices. You can see that here on the left side, we have 40,327 devices. So let's take a look at the asset inventory list. So if you, as I mentioned, we go to the dashboard, we have a look at all the adapters in our organization. And when we go to the device or to the users tab, we can actually access the asset inventory list. So here for the devices, for each device, you can see what adapter is actually collecting the information from that device. And if you do click on one of those devices, you will be able to look at all the information that has been gathered for this particular adapter. For instance, here, McAfee. McAfee is being able to identify the host name as well as some information regarding to the operating system. But what is kind of more important and really helpful is the aggregated tab. The aggregated tab is a tab that is provided by Axonius, and as I mentioned, it will take all the information from your different adapter connections to basically give you a nice overview. So why am I showing this today? It is because here inside the aggregated tab and adapter connections, you have some bold values. So here, for instance, asset name, host name, last name, all those fields can be used to actually create queries. And the queries will be really helpful to start investigating and try to understand what is going on in our organization. So if we do take a look at, for instance, here, the first question that I showed you during the presentation, how many Windows operating system do I have? Well, the first option that you can do is we create a new query using the query wizard. And you could use or the aggregated tab that I showed you previously, or you could use some specific adapter fields. So for instance, we will start with the aggregated tab. Select the aggregated tab. I search for operating system type, and then I can specify a specific type. You can also go for more details such as operating system versions. So here I will keep it simple and just look for all Windows devices in my organization. Remember, we have in total 40,000 devices, and we can now see that we have 20,000 devices that are running or Windows stations. We could, of course, complicate the query. We could also take a look at maybe some Linux devices as well. So I will need to change the query a little bit. I put some brackets here to say that I'm looking for all devices that are running Windows or Linux. So again, using the aggregated fields. And this way you can see we have about 36,000 devices. Okay, fine. We are able to identify different operating system. Let's take a look at what we can learn from the adapter side. So let's imagine we are interested in knowing, okay, from those 36,000 devices, how many of those are actually running McAfee? What we could do here is use the McAfee adapter connection and say, okay, look, give me all those Windows or Linux devices that are known by McAfee. And we can see we have 34,000. Okay, great. But what is much more interested is having a look at all the devices that are currently missing a McAfee. And that is something that you want to be able to do or that this kind of information you won't be able to get that when you go manually to the management platform from McAfee, for instance. So here we have reduced all our Windows and Linux devices to 2,000 devices that are considered non-compliant because they are missing the antivirus EPP solution. Sorry. Another thing we could do is, of course, add some more queries. Maybe we have some different agents as well. So let's take a look at Tenable, which is a VA tool. So we could also take a look at, again, all the Windows devices or Linux devices that are missing McAfee, as well as Tenable. You can see we have about 900 devices that are missing both devices. Okay, what could we do now that we have this result? Well, first of all, we should save the query. If we do save the query, we could use the query again later in the dashboards, but more importantly, also in the enforcement center. The last thing I would like to show you when we create queries is actually, as Dan mentioned, you also have assets running in the cloud. So maybe you have an asset that is running in AWS and you're interested in knowing, okay, what Linux virtual machines are running out in AWS and again that are not compliant. So here we have about 207 Linux virtual machines and CentOS. I don't think there are any Windows operating systems, but the idea is that based on those results here, the return 207 devices, we can start enforcing some actions or creating some dashboards. So let's take a look at how we could create one of those dashboards. So based on the query that I have saved previously, I will now create a field summary dashboard. And you will quickly understand, a field segmentation dashboard. And you will quickly understand how that works. So I will click here on the query that is actually returning some devices. And I will select the query that is actually looking for all virtual machines inside AWS that are missing McAfee. And if you do that, you will be able, using, of course, the field segmentation, you should be able to have a nice look at, for instance, all the different operating systems and distributions that are actually missing those McAfee, in this case, the antivirus EPP solution. So again, we had about 200 or 400 devices that are actually missing McAfee, here 440, and we can see that we have different Linux operating systems that are actually missing McAfee. Why is this kind of helpful is based on those dashboards, you can start quickly identify where are the issues, and more importantly, those dashboards are interactive. So if I do click here on the 88 Linux Ubuntu 60.04, I will be actually redirected once again to the asset inventory, and I will be able to have much more detailed information about the devices. So to show you that, I click here on the Linux Ubuntu 40.04, which is the lowest version, and you can see I'm redirected to the device tab, and this time there is a query that has been created for me. You can see that here. And we have 88 results. So all of those devices are currently missing McAfee and running CentOS 40.04. I mentioned we can also use the enforcement center. So by using the enforcement center, we have a lot of possible actions that we can enforce. So for instance, send an email. Yeah, you maybe just want to send an email to an administrator or to the user itself. You maybe want to notify the user using Teams, Slack, or another channel, or you maybe want to send some additional information to your syslog service. Webhooks are also supported, as you can see. We talked about business and management security tools. You maybe have some ticketing service in place, such as Jira or ServiceNow. You could, of course, integrate with those as well. You also have some Axonius utilities, so you could start create tags and delete some assets from Axonius as well. And yeah, you can see the list go on and on. But what is kind of interesting is here we can see we can also integrate with AWS services. So if you have maybe identified some resources that are vulnerable, or as we saw here, that are not compliant, you can tag them or eventually yeah, start taking some enforcements based on the return values of those queries. So to actually show you how that works, we will take a look at one of the examples, which is update the VA coverage. You can see that there is an integration for Tenable, so you could, if you have identified, for instance, a device that is missing Tenable or unknown by Tenable, you could actually request to add that IP address to Tenable, so he will scan that IP address. So I selected Tenable add IP address to scan. Of course, you give it a name, and then you will be able to actually select the query. So let me quickly move this here. Oh, you cannot continue. Sorry, it doesn't matter. The idea is you will be able to select the queries. So to show you that, we go to the queries tab. And you see here, I have saved a couple of queries, and I would be able to select the query, and he will use that query to actually enforce the action we have specified, which in our case was send the IP address to Tenable to actually start scanning that. Okay, so to kind of summarize everything what I showed you during this webinar, I would like to show you the dashboard. So you can create a lot of dashboards. And once again, personally, I think dashboards are kind of really helpful to identify issues and kind of important issues really fast. So here we have some dashboards that give us information regarding the assets as well as the adapters that are currently running in our environment. We could, as I mentioned previously, also gather information regarding to the users, but today we are only focusing on the agent coverage. So let's take a look at that. We have a lot of devices in this environment, about 4,800 devices that are currently missing McAfee. You can also see what operating system are missing McAfee, and once again, all those dashboards are interactive. So if I do click on one of those results here, I will be redirected again to the device tab, where I will have some additional information regarding to the assets. Maybe you are interested in what version is running or the McAfee versions. So maybe you are starting patching. You can see here we had an old version running 1.8.0, and we actually updated it to the last version 11. You may be interested in some more detailed information, such as, okay, let's try to identify all the devices that are missing McAfee, and in addition to that, those devices are known with critical vulnerabilities. So you can start using information from Tenable that was actually able to identify some vulnerabilities on the endpoint itself, and then again, you can click on those to get additional information regarding to all those devices. So you will see here that I will have a response value of 51 devices that are missing McAfee, and in addition to that, they are known with a critical vulnerability. So again, those dashboards, depending on your environment, depending on your needs, you start by creating a query. So the query will actually filter down your asset inventory list, and then you can use those queries to create those dashboards. And I think those dashboards can help you really fast to identify some issues. We talked about misconfiguration as well. So maybe you have McAfee installed, but McAfee is actually doing nothing. Yeah, so we can see here at the bottom, McAfee agent with issues. We have identified Windows devices that are actually missing McAfee for more than 1 day, as well as some broken McAfee agents. So if I do click here on the broken McAfee agent, you will see actually a really nice query showing up. So we are looking at all of the devices that are known by McAfee, so they exist in McAfee. However, if we take a look at when McAfee has seen that device the last time, we have set it to 50 days. So we're basically saying, okay, McAfee doesn't see the device for more than 50 days. However, the device has been seen the last 3 days in our organization network, for instance. So this way, you're able to identify some devices that are actually having McAfee, but McAfee is not working correctly. And this is, again, some really valuable information that you won't get through one of the dashboards in McAfee, for instance, or using other management platforms. So again, hopefully this gives a nice overview of what are the key capabilities with queries, how you can use the queries with dashboards as well as in the enforcement center. And yeah, please remind also that you can use those queries inside your reports. So if I go to the reports tab, just to notice that a report will be generated each discovery cycle. We can see here I've created a report called agent coverage, and I am actually able to download a PDF where I will be able to see all of those dashboards that I showed you today. as well as some information regarding to the queries. And you can also set up those reports to be scheduled, let's say every 2 days, and then send an automatic email to the administrators as well. So if there are any questions regarding to this, please feel free to put them in the Q&A. The last thing I would like to show you is like a more real life example here. We can see a dashboard of the Sentinel-1 deployment. So Sentinel-1 is an EDR solution. We can see the agent status for Windows devices as well as macOS devices. Maybe we are interested in some general information regarding to the deployment. How many of those operating systems are actually installed with Sentinel-1? And also a really nice dashboard, in my opinion, again, are the timeline charts. So we can see here on the right side, we can have some additional information regarding to when did we start installing Sentinel-1. So we can see here on this specific day, we go from 0 installations to about 50 installation in 1 or 2 days. So this is really helpful when you are trying to migrate or roll out a new agent. And as you can see on the bottom, we can have some additional information regarding all of those other tools or software that are being installed. So maybe you are using, as we talked about previously, some VPN agents, so remote access. You are maybe using a FortiClient or a TeamViewer, but this way you can quickly identify, okay, how many of my assets are running those particular remote access tools. So that's it what I have prepared for you guys. Just my PowerPoint bragging. Saying you can still hear me, yeah? You can confirm that, please, because I see that. Yeah, great. Sorry. Yeah, it's kind of challenging with Wi-Fi as well here. So the idea is that, as I mentioned, in my opinion, the time charts are really helpful, particularly when you are trying to roll out some new agents, for instance. So here we can see in an organization about 3,000 endpoints, all running Sentinel-1, Netscope agents, etc. And we can see here the last months they were starting actually deploying a new tool. Again, if you are interested in some specific information regarding, okay, if there is a new asset that has been detected and I want to know, okay, is that asset configured correctly? So are all the agents installed? So this is a nice dashboard that you can use to actually answer those questions. And last dashboard that I wanted to share with you is again regarding to the remote access. You may be using different remote access tools. You are maybe a larger organization worldwide and you want to know, okay, what actual remote access tools are being used in what country. So here we can see that in this organization, 4 different remote access tools are being used, and we have a nice overview of what in what countries they are more active. And this is also some really valuable information when you are trying to do some migrations. Yeah, Stan, back to you.
All right, thank you a lot, Cedric. So if people have still questions, because we're 5 minutes over time, sorry for that, please put them in the Q&A. If you have any other questions later on, feel free to contact us. Thank you for joining us today, and we'll see you next time. And Cedric, thank you, and enjoy your good night's sleep.
Thank you very much.